There's a kind of silence you only find in forgotten places, the kind that makes you realize you're not alone. Welcome to Dead Quiet. This is where real people share the moments they discovered something impossible, in places where help is measured in hours, not minutes. True accounts from warehouses, forests, inherited houses, and historic ground. No fiction. Just what happened when the ordinary became unthinkable. If you're returning from the last video, you know why you came back. That warehouse worker's story stayed with you. The tunnels beneath the distribution center, the figure in the supervisor uniform walking with patient purpose, the bodies at the bottom of the shaft, and the fact that it's still happening. Real horror doesn't leave. It settles in and waits. Tonight, we stay in Pennsylvania. 4 more documented accounts. A night shift supervisor who found a killer's graveyard beneath his workplace. A veterinarian who faced a creature that DNA couldn't identify. A man who inherited a house that traps people across time. And a restoration architect who learned that some Civil War soldiers never stopped dying. These stories come with evidence. Surveillance footage, laboratory results, journals written before the reader was born, physical marks from the dead. If this resonates with you, subscribe to Death Quiet and turn on notifications. These accounts surface when they're ready to be told. Pennsylvania is built on layers: mines, battlefields, ancient forests, sacred ground. And sometimes those layers break open. In operating warehouses, in sanctuaries bordering the wild, in inherited Victorians, in restored history. So, let everything else fall away. Pay attention to the spaces between words, to what's implied, to the silence that follows. Because after tonight, you'll understand. In the wild, silence is never empty. Marcus had been working the 3rd shift at the Riverside Distribution Center for almost 2 years when Derek vanished. The warehouse sat on the outskirts of Harrisburg, a massive concrete structure that processed thousands of packages every night. It was the kind of place where people came and went without much notice. High turnover, temporary workers, faces that blurred together under fluorescent lights. But Derek was different. He'd been there longer than most. A steady presence on the loading dock. Mid-40s, former truck driver with hands that told stories of hard work and harder miles. He always brought coffee in a battered thermos, the kind you'd find at a military surplus store. Marcus and Derek had bonded over their shared time in Iraq, those quiet conversations that veterans have when no one else is listening. Derek had a routine. Clock in at 11, coffee break at 1:30, lunch at 4. He was reliable in a place where reliability was rare. So when he didn't show up for 3 consecutive shifts, Marcus noticed. When a week passed, he started asking questions. The responses were strange, dismissive. HR claimed Derek had submitted his resignation via email, effective immediately. But Marcus had watched Derek struggle with the time clock scanner for months. The man barely touched computers. When Marcus checked the employee parking records, Derek's car had last been scanned entering the lot 11 days ago. It had never scanned out. The unease grew into something darker when Marcus pulled the security footage. He had supervisor access, a code that let him review the previous 30 days. He found Derek on camera from that last night, moving through the warehouse with his thermos and clipboard. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. Derek walked towards Section K, the oldest part of the facility, and disappeared behind a shelving unit. He never appeared on another camera. Marcus knew the warehouse layout like the back of his hand, but Section K had always been strange. It was part of the original industrial complex from the 1960s, before the current company bought and renovated the property. Most workers avoided it. The lighting was poor, the concrete cracked, and there was a persistent smell of mildew and rust. That night, after his shift ended at 6 a.m., Marcus didn't go home. He waited in his car until the day shift supervisors left, until the parking lot emptied except for his old Civic. Then he went back inside. Section K was quiet. The shelving units stood like sentries in the dim light, casting long shadows across the floor. Marcus moved the way Derek had in the footage, following the exact path until he reached the far wall. Behind a unit stacked with obsolete equipment, he found it. A door, not on any floor plan he'd ever seen. The metal was old, industrial, with a handle that turned with a grinding shriek. The stairwell beyond descended into darkness. Marcus pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and went down. The stairs were metal, each step echoing in the confined space. 20 steps down, then a landing. 20 more steps, another landing. By the third landing, Marcus realized he was well below ground level, deeper than any basement should go. The stairs ended at a corridor. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet, with exposed pipes running along the top. The walls were concrete, water-stained and crumbling in places. This was the old freight tunnel system, he realized. Back when the complex was a manufacturing plant, they'd used underground passages to move materials between buildings. Derek's thermos sat on the ground 15 feet in. Marcus picked it up with shaking hands. Still had coffee in it. Next to it, Derek's work badge and truck keys, just sitting there, like he'd set them down and walked away. Marcus forced himself forward. The corridor split into multiple passages, a maze of tunnels that extended in every direction. He chose the widest path, the one that showed signs of recent traffic, scuff marks in the dust, a cleaner patch of floor. The tunnel opened into a larger space, some kind of junction room where multiple passages met. And there, scattered around the perimeter, were more belongings. A woman's purse, a lunchbox, a backpack, work badges, keys, cell phones. Marcus counted 8 separate collections of items, 8 people. His hands were numb as he picked up one of the work badges. Sarah Chen, hired 2 years ago. He remembered her. Quiet woman, always wore a Steelers cap. Hadn't she quit suddenly? That's what everyone said. Another badge. James Morrison. Marcus had trained him, helped him learn the scanner system. Management said he'd stopped showing up, just ghosted the job. The sound reached him then. A mechanical rumble, distant but growing closer. The grinding of metal on metal, like a freight elevator operating. But there was no power down here. The tunnels had been sealed off for decades. Marcus moved toward the sound, every instinct screaming at him to run the other direction. The corridor narrowed, forcing him to turn sideways in places. The mechanical noise grew louder, accompanied now by the smell of diesel fuel and hot metal. The passage ended at a platform overlooking a massive vertical shaft. Marcus shined his light down, and his stomach dropped. The shaft descended at least 50 feet, maybe more. At the bottom, illuminated by his weak phone light, were bodies. He could see Derek's red jacket, the Steelers cap, others he didn't recognize, in various states of decomposition. A sound behind him, footsteps, not trying to be quiet. Marcus spun around, his light catching a figure at the far end of the corridor, someone in a warehouse uniform, wearing a supervisor badge just like his. The figure didn't speak, didn't move quickly, just started walking toward him with methodical purpose. Marcus ran, through the narrow corridor, back to the junction room, choosing passages at random. Behind him, the footsteps continued, never faster, but never stopping. The beam of his phone light bounced wildly as he sprinted through the darkness, making the shadows leap and twist. He found the stairs by sheer luck, taking them 3 at a time, his lungs burning. The door to Section K seemed miles away. When he finally burst through it, the warehouse's fluorescent lights felt like salvation. Marcus called 911 from the parking lot, his words tumbling over each other. The dispatcher struggled to understand. A warehouse, bodies, underground tunnels. She stayed on the line until the police arrived. 4 units with lights flashing. He led them down. The same stairs, the same corridors, all the way to the shaft. The bodies were there, just as he'd described. 8 victims, Derek being the most recent. The police spent hours documenting the scene, calling in state investigators and forensic teams. The investigation revealed details that made Marcus's skin crawl. Every victim had been marked as a voluntary resignation in the HR system. The entries were made remotely, from an IP address that bounced through multiple proxy servers across 3 continents. Someone with sophisticated knowledge had covered their tracks. The belongings in the junction room told the story. Each victim had been stalked, studied, their routines documented. But there was no camera system in the tunnels, no way to identify who had been using them. The most disturbing discovery came 3 days after the initial investigation. The forensic team had sealed the tunnels, posted guards. But when they returned to continue processing the scene, they found fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had been back down there, walking through the corridors while police tape fluttered at the entrance above. Handwriting analysis on the documentation found in the tunnels, schedules, notes, observations, matched no one in the company database. No current employee, no former employee. The writing was methodical, almost mechanical in its precision. Whoever had been killing warehouse workers had been doing it for years, and they'd perfected their system. Marcus quit the next day. The company offered counseling, a bonus, a promotion. He refused it all. He couldn't walk through those doors anymore. Couldn't look at his co-workers without wondering which of them might be next. Without wondering if one of them was responsible. He moved to Pittsburgh, found work at a small packaging company. But he checked the news obsessively, searching for any update on the Riverside investigation. The case went cold within weeks. No arrests, no suspects. The warehouse remained operational. The company couldn't afford to close it, couldn't afford to acknowledge what had happened in any meaningful way. 6 months after Derek's death, Marcus saw a news brief buried on page 7 of the Harrisburg newspaper. Another Riverside distribution center employee had failed to show up for their shift. Maria Gonzalez, night shift, Section K. Her car was still in the employee parking lot. HR claimed she'd submitted her resignation via email. Marcus called the detective who'd handled the original case, left a voicemail, never got a call back. He thinks about Derek every day, about that thermos on the ground, still warm when they found it, about the 8 collections of belongings, 8 lives reduced to scattered objects in the dark, about the figure in the warehouse uniform, walking toward him with patient, inevitable purpose. And sometimes, late at night, Marcus wonders if he was supposed to die down there too. If Derek's disappearance was meant to lure him into those tunnels. If he escaped something that's still waiting, still hunting in the corridors beneath the warehouse. The Riverside Distribution Center processes 15,000 packages every night. 300 employees walk through its doors, work their shifts, and go home. Most of them don't know about the tunnels, don't know about the bodies, don't know that somewhere in that vast concrete structure, in the forgotten spaces between floors, something, or someone, is still watching, still waiting, still choosing. Claire had been a veterinarian for nearly a decade, but she'd only been running the sanctuary for 2 years. The 40-acre property bordered Michaud State Forest in Franklin County, far enough from civilization that she could rehabilitate injured wildlife without human interference. She had 3 white-tailed deer recovering from various injuries, 2 foxes with healed fractures, and a small barn full of domestic animals she'd rescued from neglect cases. October, in Pennsylvania, meant crisp air and brilliant foliage. It also meant increased wildlife activity as animals prepared for winter. Claire was used to seeing deer, black bears, even the occasional coyote on her property. What she saw that night on Route 997 was none of those things. She was driving home from an emergency call at a farm 10 miles away. It was just past 11, the kind of darkness that only exists in rural areas where streetlights are miles apart. Her headlights cut through the night, illuminating the center line and the dense wall of forest on either side. The creature crossed the road in 3 strides. Claire's foot slammed the brake instinctively. Her truck skidded slightly on the asphalt before stopping. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the spot where it had disappeared into the trees. Not a bear. It had been upright, moving on 2 legs with a fluidity that was distinctly bipedal, and it had been tall, easily 7 feet, maybe more. She sat there for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. A person? No. The proportions were wrong, the movement too powerful, covering 15 feet of road in seconds. A bear walking upright? She'd seen that before. It didn't look like this. When she finally continued home, her hands were shaking. The property looked normal when she pulled into the gravel driveway. Porch light glowing, barn standing silent against the star-filled sky. But as she walked toward the house, she heard them, her livestock guardian dogs. 2 Great Pyrenees, bred and trained to confront bears and protect the flock. They were on the porch, pressed against the door, whining. Claire had never heard them make that sound before. She checked the barn immediately. All the animals were alive but terrified. The 3 deer huddled in the corner of their enclosure, eyes wide and rolling. The foxes were pressed flat in their kennels, exhibiting the kind of fear response she'd only seen in prey animals facing imminent death. Even her horses, usually calm and steady, were shifting nervously in their stalls. She spent an hour trying to calm them, speaking softly, checking for injuries. Nothing physical was wrong. Whatever had frightened them had been outside. Morning revealed the tracks. They were near the barn door, pressed deep into the soft earth near the water spigot. Claire crouched down, her veterinary training allowing her to identify prints the way others read books. These were canine in structure, 4 toes, claw marks, general shape. But the size made her stomach drop. 14 inches long. The claw marks extended 3 inches beyond the toe pads. The depth suggested something heavy, something far larger than any wolf or coyote. She'd seen black bear prints before. These were different, narrower, more digitigrade, built for a different kind of movement. The tracks led from the forest edge directly to the barn, then circled the building. Whatever made them had been pacing, studying, looking for a way inside. Claire photographed everything, then called her neighbor Henry. He'd been a Pennsylvania Game Commission officer for 30 years before retiring. If anyone would know what made these prints, it would be him. Henry arrived within the hour, his truck kicking up dust on the gravel drive. He was in his late 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. He studied the prints for a long time without saying anything, walking the perimeter of the barn, following the trail back to the forest edge. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I've seen these before. 1996. We had 3 hunters go missing in Michaud that year. Found their campsite torn apart, but no bodies. He paused. looking toward the dark tree line. Had livestock deaths too. Dairy farms losing cattle, sheep operations getting hit. Then it stopped. Just stopped. Thought maybe it was a rogue bear that died or moved on. What do you think it is? Claire asked. Henry shook his head. Don't know. Game Commission brought in experts back then. Nobody could identify it. Prints didn't match anything in their databases. Whatever it is, it's not supposed to exist. That night, Claire installed every motion sensor light she owned around the property. She moved her rifle from the gun safe to beside her bed. And she tried to sleep, listening to every sound the old farmhouse made. The attack started 2 days later. She found the first deer in the morning, or what was left of it. The body was in the recovery enclosure, torn open with a violence that made her stomach turn. Claire had seen predator kills before. Coyotes, foxes, even bears. This was different. The bite radius suggested a jaw span of 8 to 10 inches. Chunks of meat were missing, consumed, but the kill seemed almost excessive, rage-driven. She collected fur samples from the fence where the creature had forced its way through. The strands were coarse, dark brown to black, longer than wolf fur, but with a texture she couldn't identify. The second deer died 3 nights later, despite the motion lights and reinforced fencing. This time, Claire was awake when it happened. The lights triggered at 2:47 a.m., flooding the yard in harsh white light. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside in time to hear the death scream, a sound she'd never forget. By the time she reached the enclosure, the creature was gone. The deer was still warm, throat torn out, steam rising from the blood in the cold October air. Claire sent the fur samples to Penn State's veterinary laboratory, requesting a full DNA analysis. She installed trail cameras at every entrance to her property, and she stopped sleeping, keeping watch from the barn with her rifle across her lap. The lab results came back a week later, and the director called her personally. "Ms. Hayes, where did you get this sample?" His voice was tight, professionally confused. "From my property. It's been killing my animals." A long pause. "The DNA shows canid markers, wolf, dog, coyote family, but there are anomalies in the chromosomal structure. Sequences that don't match anything in our database. I'd like to send this to some colleagues, if you're willing." She agreed. What else could she do? The trail cameras captured footage, but it was almost useless. Every time the creature came close, the video distorted. Electromagnetic interference that turned the image into static and pixelated chaos. But she got one clear frame. Just one. 7 feet tall, standing upright near the tree line. The body was humanoid in posture but covered in dark fur. The head was distinctly canine, elongated snout, pointed ears, and the eyes. Even in the grainy footage, they glowed with reflected light, amber-colored and intelligent. The researchers came 3 days later. A cryptozoologist from Penn State, brought in by the lab director. Dr. Sarah Brennan was in her 40s, serious and academic, but she listened to Claire's account without skepticism. "You're not the first," Dr. Brennan said, sitting at Claire's kitchen table with a laptop full of files. "We've documented similar sightings across Appalachia for decades. The pattern is consistent. They appear every 20 to 25 years, stay for several months, then vanish. Last significant cluster of sightings in this area was 1996. What are they?" "We don't know. Not officially. The DNA suggests something that shouldn't exist. A species that diverged from known canids at some point in evolutionary history. Or," she hesitated, "or something else entirely." That night, Claire had the encounter that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was in the barn at 2:30 a.m., checking on her remaining animals. The motion lights had triggered twice already, flooding the property in white light. But she'd seen nothing. She was starting to think the creature had moved on when she heard the sound. Scratching, heavy, deliberate scratching on the barn's back wall. Claire grabbed her rifle and moved toward the sound. Through a gap in the boards, she could see something massive on the other side. Dark fur, powerful shoulders. It was trying to tear through the wall. She kicked open the back door, rifle raised, and came face to face with it. 7 feet of muscle and fur, standing fully upright on digitigrade legs. The head was wolf-like but larger, more pronounced. The eyes caught her flashlight and reflected back like mirrors, amber and gold, with an intelligence that froze her in place. Claire raised the rifle, finger on the trigger, but she didn't shoot. The creature didn't attack. It stood there, watching her with those impossible eyes, studying her the way a human might study an interesting puzzle. 30 seconds passed. 40. The standoff was silent except for Claire's breathing and the creature's low, rumbling respiration. Then it vocalized. The sound came from deep in its chest, a rumbling growl that built into something else. Not quite a howl, not quite a roar. The sound wave hit Claire like a physical force, vibrating in her chest cavity, making her teeth ache. She gasped, nearly dropping the rifle. The creature turned and moved away with fluid, powerful grace. Not running, walking. It disappeared into the forest at a pace that showed no fear, no urgency, just departure. Claire stood there for 10 minutes, rifle raised, before her legs would move again. Dr. Brennan returned the next day with more information. She'd analyzed the trail camera footage, enhanced what she could. She'd also brought reports, dozens of them, spanning decades. Sightings in West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. Always in forested areas, always the same description. "We think they're denning," Dr. Brennan said. "The pattern suggests a breeding cycle. They come to specific locations, establish territory, stay for a season, then leave." "More than one?" Claire asked. "Almost certainly. Solitary apex predators don't behave this way. This is territorial behavior, family group behavior." The confirmation came a week later when Claire found the den. She'd been tracking the prints deeper into Keystone State Forest, following a game trail the creature had been using. The den entrance was massive, a tunnel dug into the base of a rocky hillside, large enough for something 7 feet tall to enter. Around the entrance, multiple sets of prints, different sizes, an adult and at least 2 juveniles, based on the track dimensions. Claire didn't enter. She photographed the site from a distance and reported it to Dr. Brennan, who reported it to the Game Commission. Within days, the area was quietly cordoned off with dangerous wildlife warnings. No explanation given to the public. Claire lost 6 more animals over the following month. The creatures, because now she knew it was plural, hunted her property regularly. She reinforced everything, slept in the barn, kept her rifle loaded. The attacks decreased but never stopped completely. Winter came and the activity ceased. By January, the den was empty. Dr. Brennan's team investigated it thoroughly, collecting samples, documenting everything. The creatures had left as mysteriously as they'd arrived, but Claire knows they'll be back. Dr. Brennan's research suggests a 20-year cycle. The next appearance would be around 2044, but there's no guarantee. No pattern is perfect. Claire still runs her sanctuary, still rehabilitates injured animals, still lives on the property that borders Keystone State Forest. But she doesn't go out after dark without her rifle. She checks the motion sensors obsessively, and every time she sees tracks in the mud, her heart stops until she confirms they're from something known, something natural, because she's seen what shares the forest with her. She's looked into those amber eyes and seen intelligence staring back. She knows that somewhere in the vast expanse of Keystone State forest, in caves and dens that no human has mapped, something lives that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind carries sounds from the forest, she hears it, howling, calling, waiting. Nathan had never met his Aunt Rebecca. She was his father's older sister, a woman who'd lived her entire adult life in Pottsville, a declining coal town in Schuylkill County, where the population had been shrinking for decades. When she died at 89, Nathan was surprised to learn he'd inherited her house. His father had died years ago, and apparently Nathan was the only surviving blood relative. The Victorian was built in 1889, 3 stories of narrow rooms and dark wood paneling. It sat on a street where half the houses were abandoned, their windows dark and their yards overgrown. The kind of neighborhood where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. Nathan was a software engineer, working remotely from Philadelphia. His plan was simple: assess the property, clear out anything valuable, and sell it. Use the money to pay off student loans. He'd never been to Pottsville before and had no intention of staying long. The lawyer who handled the estate met him at the house on a cold Saturday in March. She was professional, but seemed uncomfortable, rushing through the paperwork and leaving quickly. As she pulled away, she paused and rolled down her window. "Your aunt died falling down the basement stairs," she said. "The coroner said she had advanced dementia. Talked a lot about visitors from other times, people who weren't there. Just thought you should know." Nathan spent the first hour walking through the house, taking inventory. Most of the furniture was covered in white sheets, giving the rooms a ghostly appearance. The kitchen was outdated, but functional. Upstairs bedrooms were filled with boxes of belongings, 89 years of accumulated life. The basement was last on his mental list. He almost skipped it entirely, assuming it would just be more storage, more junk to sort through. But something drew him down there, some instinct he couldn't name. The stairs were narrow and wooden, each step creaking under his weight. The basement was unfinished, exposed beams, concrete walls, and sections of dirt floor. A single bare bulb provided weak yellow light. Behind the old water heater, Nathan noticed something odd. A door. Modern construction, steel frame, completely out of place in the century-old basement. The door wasn't locked. Behind it was a small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with concrete walls and no windows. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Cork boards covered another, filled with timelines, photographs, and documents connected by red string, like something from a detective movie. The center of the room held a desk, and on that desk was a journal, open to a specific page. Nathan picked it up, recognizing his aunt's handwriting from her signature on the estate documents. The entry was dated March 14th, 2024, yesterday. The house remembers everything, every moment, every person, every version of events that might have been. I've spent 40 years documenting what happens here, and I finally understand. It's not haunted, it's unstuck. Time doesn't flow here the way it should. March 15th to 20th is when the boundaries are thinnest. Nathan will come tomorrow. He'll find this room, and then he'll understand what I tried to protect him from. Nathan's hands trembled as he read. His aunt had died 3 weeks ago. She couldn't have written this yesterday, but the ink was fresh, the page recently turned. He forced himself to examine the rest of the room systematically. The filing cabinets contained decades of documentation. Patient, methodical records of impossible events. Journal entries from 1985 described Aunt Rebecca waking up in different rooms with no memory of moving, finding objects from her childhood that had been lost decades earlier, hearing conversations from the past echoing through the walls. But it went back further, much further. Nathan found journals from previous occupants of the house, a family named Winters who'd lived here in the 1970s, a widow named Helen Craft from the 1950s, a couple named Porter from the 1920s. Each set of journals documented the same phenomena: temporal distortions, time slips, encounters with people who shouldn't exist. The oldest journal was from 1889, written by the original builder. I designed this house using principles from the old texts: sacred geometry, ley line alignment. The Lenape warned me about building here, said the ground was sacred, used for ceremony. I thought I could harness it, control it. I was wrong. Nathan found the timeline on the cork board. It listed every known occupant of the house from 1889 to present. 23 owners in 135 years. Every single one had either died mysteriously or disappeared. And there, at the bottom of the timeline, was Nathan's name, with yesterday's date beside it. He dropped the journal, backing away from the desk. This wasn't possible. His aunt had been suffering from dementia, creating elaborate fantasies. This was mental illness, not prophecy. But then he saw the list on the wall, 12 names, written in different handwriting styles, spanning different decades. Each name had a date beside it, always between March 15th to 20th, and each name was marked with a red X and the word displaced. Thomas Brennan, March 17th, 1892. Disappeared. Sarah Mitchell, March 18th, 1908. Disappeared. James Porter, March 16th, 1923. Disappeared. The list continued. 12 people who'd vanished from this house during a specific 5-day window. Nathan checked his phone. March 14th. He was inside the window. He decided to leave immediately. But as he climbed the basement stairs, he heard something that made him freeze. Footsteps. Upstairs, moving through the second-floor hallway. Nathan stood perfectly still, listening. The house was supposed to be empty. He'd locked the front door behind him. The footsteps were slow, methodical, moving from room to room like someone searching for something. He climbed the rest of the stairs quietly, checking each room on the first floor. Empty. He went upstairs, following the sound. The footsteps had stopped, but now he could hear breathing, coming from the master bedroom. Nathan pushed open the door. The room was furnished, not with the sheet-covered furniture he'd seen before, but with period-accurate pieces from a different era. A 4-poster bed, a vanity with mirror, a wardrobe, and sitting at the vanity, brushing her hair, was a woman in a Victorian-era dress. She looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then she vanished, and the room was empty again. Just bare walls and dusty floorboards. Nathan ran downstairs, heart hammering. He went straight for the front door, but when he opened it, he stopped. Outside wasn't his car in the empty street. Outside was a dirt road with a horse-drawn carriage passing by. Buildings that didn't exist anymore. The year was wrong. He slammed the door shut, backed away. Tried the back door. It opened onto farmland. Corn growing in fields that should be houses. Tried the side door. It opened onto the street, but wrong decade. Cars from the 1950s parked along the curb. The windows showed different eras from each vantage point. Past, present, and possibly future, all existing simultaneously. Nathan grabbed his phone, tried to call 911, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, no connection to the outside world. The house had cut him off. He went back to the basement, to the research room, looking for answers. Aunt Rebecca's most recent journal, the real one, from before she died, was filed alphabetically. He found it and started reading. She'd figured it out. The house was built on a Lenape ceremonial site, a place where shamans would perform rituals to communicate with ancestors. The original builder, obsessed with spiritualism and mysticism, had designed the house as a machine to amplify those properties. Sacred geometry in the floor plan, specific materials in the foundation. The architecture itself was meant to thin the barriers between times. But he'd made a mistake. Instead of controlled access to the past, he'd created a trap, a place where time pooled and eddied and folded back on itself. During certain dates, specifically March 15th to 20th, the effect intensified. People became unstuck, displaced into other times. Some were never seen again. Aunt Rebecca had experienced it herself in 1985. She'd vanished for 3 days, found herself walking through the house in 1947. She'd seen people from that era, interacted with them, touched objects, and then, somehow, she'd returned. She'd spent the next 40 years trying to understand how, trying to protect future occupants. The key, she'd written, was the basement room. The concrete walls and modern construction disrupted the effect. It was a safe zone, immune to the temporal distortions. Nathan checked his watch. 9:47 p.m., March 14th. He had until midnight before entering the danger zone. He decided to wait it out in the basement room, brought down water, snacks, blankets, sealed himself in at 10:30 p.m. and refused to leave. The night was endless. He could hear sounds from the house above, footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing. Sometimes the voices were speaking English, sometimes other languages. Sometimes the words were familiar, but the accents were from centuries past. At 11:55 p.m., Nathan heard his aunt's voice, clear as day, calling his name from the top of the basement stairs. "Nathan, come up here. I need to show you something." He didn't respond, didn't move. He knew she was dead, knew it was a trap. The voice changed. His father's voice now, identical to his memories. "Nathan, it's okay. You can come out now." He pressed his hands over his ears and waited. At 12:01 a.m., March 15th, everything went silent. Nathan waited until dawn before opening the door. The house was normal again, or as normal as it could be. He walked through each room, checking, confirming that the doors led where they should, that the windows showed the correct year. He left immediately, drove back to Philadelphia without stopping, hands shaking the entire way. For weeks afterward, Nathan tried to sell the house. Every potential buyer backed out after visiting. Some claimed to feel uncomfortable. Others reported seeing things that couldn't be explained. One couple's realtor refused to go back after their initial showing. Nathan contacted the township, tried to have the house condemned. But the structure was sound, the foundation solid. There were no legal grounds. He tried to have it demolished. 3 different contractors took the job, and all 3 quit after starting work. Equipment malfunctions, workers reporting strange experiences. One crew foreman said his men refused to enter the building after several of them saw people who weren't there. Nathan researched the property records in detail. Every owner since 1889 had died mysteriously or disappeared. The average ownership duration was less than 6 years. The house had the highest turnover rate of any residential property in Pottsville's history. And then he discovered the will clause. Buried in the legal language was a provision. If Nathan refused ownership or tried to abandon the property, it would automatically transfer to the next blood relative, his cousin's daughter. She was 7 years old. Nathan couldn't do that to her, couldn't pass the curse to a child. He hired a security company to monitor the property remotely, paid the taxes and utilities, kept it empty and locked, and every March, he watched the security camera feeds obsessively. The cameras caught things that shouldn't be possible. Lights turning on in empty rooms, shadows moving through hallways. And once, on March 17th, the cameras caught Nathan himself, walking through the first floor, wearing the same clothes he'd worn that night he'd hidden in the basement. But Nathan was in Philadelphia that night, watching the live feed, seeing himself in the house at the same time. He finally understood. Some version of him hadn't stayed in the basement. Some version had gone upstairs when his father's voice called, and that version was still there, trapped in the house, displaced into a time that didn't quite sync with reality. Nathan still owns the house, can't sell it, can't demolish it, can't escape it. And sometimes, late at night, he receives phone calls from his own number. When he answers, there's only silence, or breathing, or sometimes his own voice, distorted and distant, saying things he doesn't remember speaking. The house waits, and Nathan knows that one day he'll have to go back. Elizabeth had spent her entire career preserving history. As a restoration architect specializing in Civil War-era properties, she'd worked on dozens of historic buildings across Pennsylvania and Maryland. She understood old structures, knew their quirks, their sounds, the way they settled and breathed. So when she found the 1843 farmhouse, 8 miles from Gettysburg, at an estate sale, she saw an opportunity, not a warning. The property was beautiful despite its decay. Original stone barn, root cellar carved into a hillside, and even the remains of old slave quarters, historically significant structures that told the story of a complicated past. The house itself was structurally sound, with good bones, as the saying went. It needed work, but Elizabeth had done this before. The previous owner had died in the house at 94. Natural causes, the estate lawyer assured her. There was one line in the disclosure documents that Elizabeth had skimmed over. Property may experience unusual nocturnal disturbances. She'd assumed it meant the plumbing or old floorboards. Every historic house had those. The first weekend, Elizabeth stayed overnight to begin preliminary work. She lived an hour away in Harrisburg and planned to commute, but she needed to assess the property thoroughly. On Saturday night, exhausted from clearing debris and documenting the structure, she fell asleep in a sleeping bag on the parlor floor. She woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of moaning. Not the wind, not pipes, human voices, low and agonized, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Men crying out, some calling for mothers, others for medics. The sounds were muffled, distant, like listening to a conversation through thick walls. Elizabeth sat up, heart racing. She walked through the house, checking each room, but found nothing. The sounds continued, rising and falling in waves. Sometimes she could almost make out words, pleas for water, prayers whispered in desperation. By the time the sun rose, the sounds had stopped. Elizabeth tried to rationalize it, maybe sounds from a distant highway, carried strangely by the wind. Maybe her exhaustion had caused auditory hallucinations. She almost convinced herself. The second night was worse. At 2:30 a.m., Elizabeth woke to the sound of heavy boots on the floorboards above her. Not one person, many, a whole group moving through the upstairs rooms with purpose. She heard metal instruments clattering, urgent voices shouting instructions she couldn't quite understand, and underneath it all, the same moaning she'd heard the night before. Then she smelled it, burning flesh, antiseptic, and underneath, the sickly sweet smell of gangrene and decay. Elizabeth knew these smells. She'd researched Civil War medicine extensively, studied the conditions in field hospitals, read first-hand accounts from surgeons and nurses. This was exactly how they described it: the overwhelming stench of a wartime hospital where men died by the dozens. She got out of bed and stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the darkness of the second floor. The sounds were coming from the master bedroom. She could hear sawing now, a rhythmic back and forth that made her stomach turn. She forced herself up the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The master bedroom door was closed. She put her hand on the knob, took a breath, and pushed it open. Empty, just bare walls and dusty floorboards. But as she stood in the doorway, the sounds stopped abruptly, as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. The silence was somehow worse. In the morning, Elizabeth found evidence she couldn't dismiss. Wet boot prints on the upstairs hallway floor. Mud mixed with something darker. Blood. The prints led from the stairs to the master bedroom and then stopped. She photographed them, measured them, and watched them fade over the course of the day until they vanished completely. Elizabeth spent the next week at the Gettysburg National Military Park Archives, researching the property. What she found made her skin crawl. The house had been commandeered as a Union Field Hospital from July 2nd to 5th, 1863, immediately following the battle. A surgeon named Dr. Josiah Wentworth had set up operations there, performing emergency amputations on wounded soldiers. The archives contained his detailed records: 47 amputations in 72 hours. 19 soldiers had died from their wounds, from infection, or from surgical shock. Elizabeth found a leather-bound ledger in a hidden compartment behind the parlor wall during her renovations. It contained Dr. Wentworth's personal notes, written in cramped handwriting by candlelight. The entries were clinical but haunting. July 2nd, 11 p.m. Private Elijah Marsh, 26th Pennsylvania Infantry. Left leg amputation above knee. Patient survived surgery but walked from operating table to barn in state of shock. Expired before we could retrieve him. Body not recovered. July 3rd, 2 a.m. Corporal James Mitchell, both arms amputated. Patient asked me to write to his mother. Died before I could take dictation. He was 19 years old. 19 names. 19 men who had died in the house. Their blood had soaked into the floorboards. Their final moments had occurred within these walls. Elizabeth also found Dr. Wentworth's medical kit still hidden in the parlor compartment. Bone saw, amputation knives, forceps, and a bottle of chloroform. The instruments were exactly what she'd heard clattering in the night. As July approached, the activity intensified. Elizabeth had moved into the house full-time, documenting everything. On June 30th, she woke to the sound of wagon wheels on the gravel drive. Impossible, since the driveway was now paved. She heard horses, men shouting orders, the organized chaos of wounded soldiers being unloaded and carried inside. July 1st brought the first full apparition. Elizabeth was on the front porch at dusk when she saw him. A young soldier, no more than 20, sitting on the steps. His right arm was gone, blood soaking through the cloth tied around the stump. He turned to look at her, his face gray with shock, and mouthed the words, "Help me." Then he faded, dissolving into the evening air like smoke. Elizabeth began seeing more of them, shadow figures lying in the hallways where soldiers would have been placed, waiting for surgery. Translucent forms in the parlor, men dying slowly from wounds that 19th century medicine couldn't treat. They appeared most strongly in her peripheral vision, vanishing when she looked directly at them. July 2nd was the anniversary of the hospital's busiest day. Elizabeth knew from the records that this was when Dr. Wentworth had performed the most surgeries, when the most soldiers had died. She prepared herself, but nothing could have readied her for what happened. She woke at midnight to a house transformed. The electric lights were gone, replaced by candlelight. The empty rooms were filled with period-accurate furniture, the surgical table in the kitchen, pallets on the floor, medical supplies on every surface. And everywhere, soldiers. 6 men lay on the kitchen table, or what had become the surgical table. Dr. Wentworth stood over one of them, bone saw in hand, while 2 orderlies held the patient down. The patient was conscious, screaming, his leg twisted and bloody beneath the tourniquet. Elizabeth stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move or speak. This wasn't just sounds or shadows. This was a complete manifestation, solid and real, and happening right in front of her. Dr. Wentworth looked up and saw her. His face was exhausted, streaked with blood and sweat. He looked confused, as if trying to place her. "Are you the new volunteer from town?" he asked, his voice perfectly clear. He reached toward her with a blood-covered hand. Elizabeth felt his fingers close around her wrist, cold, solid, real. The room spun. She experienced everything at once. The screaming, the smell of blood and chloroform, the desperate sounds of dying men. The patient on the table looked directly at her, his eyes pleading, and choked out 4 words. "Tell them I tried." Then he died, his body going limp, and the room snapped back to normal. Elizabeth was alone in her empty kitchen, but her wrist bore bruise marks in the exact shape of fingers. She called Penn State's parapsychology research department the next morning. Within 2 days, Dr. Sarah Mitchell and her team were conducting a full investigation. The evidence they collected was extraordinary. EVP recordings, captured voices, surgical instructions, prayers, death rattles. Thermal imaging showed 19 distinct cold spots, each shaped roughly like a human body. One researcher became violently ill in the master bedroom, experiencing a vivid hallucination of a surgery in progress. Dr. Mitchell's conclusion was clear. This isn't residual haunting, repeated echoes of past events. This is intelligent. The spirits are aware, and they're trying to communicate. Elizabeth brought in a Civil War historian and an Episcopal priest. Together they conducted a memorial service in the house, reading all 19 names aloud, acknowledging their sacrifice, thanking them for their service. The historian had a theory about Private Marsh, the soldier who died in the barn. Elizabeth used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area where the barn foundation had a depression. The results showed an anomaly consistent with human remains. She contacted the proper authorities, and an archaeological team carefully excavated the site. They found him. Private Elijah Marsh, still wearing the remnants of his 26th Pennsylvania Infantry uniform. Brass buttons corroded green, fragments of wool fabric, and bones that showed clear evidence of a crude above-knee amputation. Elizabeth arranged for a proper burial in Gettysburg National Cemetery with full military honors. The honor guard fired the 3-volley salute. A bugler played taps. And for the first time in 161 years, Private Elijah Marsh was recognized for his sacrifice. After the burial, the phenomena changed. The full manifestations stopped. No more physical contact. No more complete transformations of the house. But the sounds continued, especially during the July 1st to 4th anniversary. Quieter now, less desperate. Elizabeth made a decision. She wouldn't sell the house. Instead, she turned it into a small museum. the Wentworth Field Hospital Museum. She displayed the medical instruments, Dr. Wentworth's ledger, and photographs of the 19 soldiers who had died there. She told their stories, gave them names and faces, made sure they were remembered. Visitors to the museum frequently reported experiences, seeing shadows in doorways, hearing whispers, feeling sudden cold spots. One woman fainted in the master bedroom, claiming she'd seen a pile of amputated limbs in the corner. A teenage boy on a school trip insisted someone had tapped his shoulder, but no one was near him. Elizabeth now lives full-time in the house. She's made peace with its residents. Every year on July 2nd, she lights 19 candles in the parlor, one for each soldier, and reads their names aloud. Private Elijah Marsh, Corporal James Mitchell, Sergeant Thomas Flynn. She thanks them for their service, acknowledges their suffering, and promises they won't be forgotten. And every year, as she speaks those names by candlelight, she sees them. 19 shadow figures standing along the walls of the parlor, silent and still. Sometimes she thinks they nod to her before fading. Sometimes she hears a whispered, "Thank you," in the darkness. Elizabeth believes they've found some measure of peace. They're no longer trying to get her attention, no longer desperately reliving their trauma. They're simply present, witnesses to their own story finally being told. One descendant of Corporal Mitchell visited the museum last year. He told Elizabeth that his great-great-grandfather had appeared to him in a dream. He said, "Someone finally remembers us," the man said, tears in his eyes. He said he can rest now. The house still carries its history in every board and stone. The scent of antiseptic still drifts through the hallway on July nights. The sound of moaning still echoes through the walls. But it's different now. Not trapped, witnessed. Elizabeth sits in the parlor most evenings, reading by candlelight. Sometimes she looks up and acknowledges the shadows watching from the corners. "Good evening, gentlemen," she says, and in the silence that follows, she swears she can hear them respond. Some houses don't just hold history, they hold souls, and some souls need a witness to finally rest.